Bomba de Nat. Mahadev, Mahadev. Button rum, can you bring me my cup? I have some hot tea for my throat. I think we're on there, but not on this one, thank you. You want to turn the heater on a little bit more? Okay. Demo. Is this slide? Yeah, slide on. Take. Om Mangalam Gurudevaya Devi Matriksha Mangalam Mangalam Bhakta Brindevyo Sarva Lokaya Mangalam Om Stapakaya Chidharmasya Sarva Dharma Sarupine Avatara Varishtaya Ramakrishnaya Mangalam Om Sarashiva Samarambam Shankarachara Madhyamam Ashmadachara Prayantam Bande Gurum Paramparam Om Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwaraha Gurureva Param Brahman Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Ganesha Sharada Gurubhyo Namaha Jai Ma, Jai Ma. So we're picking up where we left off a few weeks ago. Last week we canceled because I didn't have quite the voice for speaking due to this nasty virus that everybody seems to have. A lot of people who are probably usually sitting here, probably not sitting here for that reason. So that's the way it is. But what to do? Moving on. So we are from Swami Vivekananda's Bhakti Yoga. What did we read before? Catch. So the last time we spent a couple weeks talking on this. On the means and the ways to cultivate bhakti by purity of food, by discipline, by like these things we were discussing. And now the next chapter is these two sections. Actually, the section Bhakti Yoga intensifies quite a bit in these final chapters. It goes from 5 to 108 really fast. It goes flying, I think. So these are some of the fuel for the jump. So this chapter is called the Preparatory Renunciation. Everyone's favorite topic is renunciation, I know. Well, this is what Swamiji will talk about. We have finished the consideration of what may be called preparatory bhakti, and now shall enter the study of para bhakti, or supreme devotion. We have to speak of the preparation for the practice of this para bhakti. All such preparations are intended only for the purification of the soul. The repetition of names, the rituals, the forms, the symbols, all these various things are for the purification of the soul. This para bhakti has many names. It's called, in the Swamiji would usually describe it as para bhakti. In the Devi Gita, also the Devi herself uses this term para bhakti. means supreme devotion. But technically, it has a few other terms: Raganuga Bhakti, Nirguna Bhakti, Muktya Bhakti. There's a few other terms mentioned in devotional scriptures. Mukhya means free, liberated. Nirguna, it means beyond the three gunas. Raganuga Bhakti means the supreme devotion. It's this kind of transcendental devotion. So what we're doing when we come to a temple, when we do our daily japa meditation according to the instructions of the Guru, we read the scriptures, we have satsang, we attend kirtan, we listen to devotional music, we read the scriptures like this. We go on pilgrimage, we give in charity, we cook food purely and offer food to the deity, take prasadam. All these are in the category of these aren't. These are in the category of preparatory. Swami uses the word preparatory bhakti. Sri Ramakrishna uses Vaidhi Bhakti, right? And a very important chapter in the Kathamrita, it's in the Gospel. It's called, I think it's called Conversation with Vijay Krishna Goswami. It's a very deep, powerful, and complicated discussion about these very things. So preparatory bhakti or Vaidhi Bhakti, or you could say according to the rules and regulations of yoga. Yama, niyama, the instructions of the Guru, and instructions of the scripture. The reason for it is so that we purify the mind. Swami is the purification of the soul. Where we were saying a couple weeks ago that all purposes of sadhana is manashuddhi, purification of the mind, heart, soul, like this. So doing japa daily is not the same as bhakti. Right? Bhakti is supreme devotion. Right. Doing japa, the purpose of japa and other related sadhanas in beginning stages is to purify the mind so that devotion awakens. But also in the beginning stages, we can also say that devotion is shown by doing daily sadhana. One example I'm remembering many years ago from Bharahari Das, who used to be the temple president here in Laguna Beach Hare Krishna Temple. He used the example of his child. He says that I'm very, sometimes my desire to feed and bathe my daughter is very great, right? There's so much love and it's pouring force towards her. Sometimes you don't feel like the last thing you want to do is wake up and bathe a screaming child like that, or feed, or go to work to raise money, to get money and cook and like that. But you do it anyways because you love her. Sometimes love is overflowing, that's natural. Sometimes it may not be, but out of love you still do it. So sometimes sadhana can be this way also. Sometimes daily sadhana is also expression of love. And the purpose of daily sadhana is to awaken this love, this pada. Can you lower the heater a little bit? Lower the heater a little bit. Getting too hot for me. Too cold and too hot. Thank you. But para, and I'm remembering our discussions on Narada Bhakti Sutra. Narada is describing bhakti as he says as prema. He says prema surupa. And he also uses this word para several times. And para means, we usually describe it as supreme. Para also means other. So it means when you think of devotion, or you think of emotion or devotion or commitment, that's not the same as, para is different than that. So para means, it's the highest level, para, supreme, also means completely other than what we think. What we usually think of devotion, para bhakti is not that. It's beyond that. And so by saying beyond, another word we use in English is transcendental. It transcended, that which is beyond conception or our normal thinking of it. So para bhakti. So Swami is going to start talking about this para bhakti in the next couple of chapters. But so far, actually, all he's been doing is ways to awaken general devotion. Now, when devotion is awakened, then you have to get from regular bhakti to para bhakti. So if para bhakti is beyond or transcendental, beyond the gunas, that means regular bhakti is within the gunas, which means, or we'd say, conditioned. we're still conditioned beings, right? And so in Sri Ramakrishna describes is we have just like people are of three types, or mixture of types of rajasic, tamasic, sattvika. Similarly, devotion is also sattvika, rajasic, and tamasic. There's a verse in the Devi Gita, remembering this morning. The Divine Mother herself is speaking. Devotion, as practiced by human beings, is of three kinds, in accord to the qualities of nature, the gunas. A person who intends harm to others while engaging in deceit, and who is spiteful and irascible, practices devotion characterized by ignorance, or tamas. You can see some devotion. Actually, you see a lot of manifestations of devotion in the world as we see. These are almost horrible. It's almost directly horrible, right? Violence is done, and it's backwards and repressive and violent and dark like this. But that's also a type of devotion. You can't say people don't have devotion, but it's not very refined, obviously. Those who are one who is ever lustful, seeking fame and seeking pleasure, who worships me, the Divine Mother speaking, intently for the sake of obtaining this or that fruit, who foolishly assumes false distinctions, thinking that I am other than one's own being. Such a person practices devotion characterized by passionate yearning, rajas, O Mountain Chief, talking to the Himalayas. And so that the normal criticism, we sometimes self-criticism that we give in our religious spiritual motivation is that we have selfish motivation. We worship God in order to get stuff, right? Make things favorable, right? Get this or that fruit, right? Like please give us a job, please heal myself, or let me be successful. I mean, right now is New Year's, right? So the next few days, the temple will be very, very full of people. Naturally, we should thank God for the blessings and struggles of this year and pray for a better year in the future, right? But a lot of people, what we're praying for, may be successful. And so this is Rajasic Bhakti, right? Where we're worshiping with some tinge of selfish motivation. Jai Ma. No problem. I've mentioned several times, it's a little scene in a small book that really impressed my mind a little bit. It's a conversation with the Hare Krishna founder, Srila Prabhupada, and I think it's a book called Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers. It's a conversation, interview with him with a Peace Corps worker in Mayapur. And in the discussion, the person says, but many people are worshiping God for money, right? And he says, and Prabhupada says, yes, that's true. He says, well, that's wrong. That's bad. And Prabhupada said, actually, worshiping God is never bad, right? So that's actually worshiping Krishna is always good, never bad, right? He says, at least the person who worships God for money knows the source of all money is God. Krishna is the source of everything, right? So it's actually a pretty intelligent position, right? They know the source of everything and they know who to go. He says, and if they worship God even for money, slowly they become purified, because God's a great purifier, right? And that's through that sadhana, through that practice, through that slowly they get purified, and their lust and the desire the heart and mind gets purified, and then they worship God just for devotion, right? So it's not like, if you worship of God is never bad, right? So even worship in the rajasic mode, right? One who's so one of the qualities of thinking, also, like our Divine Mother speaking here, seeing that God is separate from me is also one of the symptoms of Rajasic Bhakti. One who offers all karmic fruits to me, the Supreme Ruler, in order to be cleansed of all evil, who thinks I must carry out the acts enjoined by the Vedas without faltering, who is thus convinced but still clings to the false distinctions, who performs all work out of a sense of love. Such a person practices devotion characterized by virtue, or sattva, O mountain. Right, sattvic bhakti is being described. Here she's saying, like, oh no, I shall do this, I shall follow the scriptures perfectly with great faith, right? And I shall offer, like Krishna says, offer the fruits of your action, karma. So one who offers the fruits of all their actions, offering it to God, wanting to follow the scriptures properly, and who does everything out of the sense of love and dedication to God. That's very high bhakti, but it's considered sattvic bhakti. But the problem, sattvic bhakti, although wonderful, is still in the gunas. And God is trigunatita. He's beyond, he or she, it is beyond the gunas. So para bhakti is beyond that, right? So then she says, this latter, sattvic bhakti, although still clinging to false distinctions, leads to the highest devotion, para bhakti. But the two former kinds of devotion, that's rajasic and tamasic bhakti, do not lead to the highest. So it is understood. So wherever we are, we should try to develop sattvic bhakti by instructions of the scriptures, instructions of the guru, by daily spiritual practice, purifying our motivations like this, bit by bit like this. But we have to attain para bhakti. We'll go back to the section. Go back to Swamiji. The greatest purifier among all such things, a purifier without which no one can enter the regions of the higher devotion, is renunciation. This frightens many, yet without it there cannot be any spiritual growth. In all the yogas, renunciation is necessary. This is the stepping stone and the real center. It's working. This is the stepping stone and the real center, the real heart of all spiritual culture, renunciation. This is religion, renunciation. So Swamiji has given a few, so far, definitions of religion. Religion is realization, these different type of things. Here he says religion is renunciation. When the human soul draws back from the things of the world and tries to go into deeper things, when man, the spirit, which has somehow become concretized and materialized, understands that he is going to be destroyed and reduced almost to mere matter, and turns his face away from matter, then begins renunciation. Then begins real spiritual growth. Actually, we're trying to find the spirit to be attached to matter. That's a impossible situation. We're looking at something infinite, and we're attached to finite. We're looking for something unlimited, and we're attached to the limited, right? And if we're trying to find ourselves, which is also infinite, and we find ourselves stuck in this little tiny body, and we can see this, with a little bit of intelligence, unfortunate intelligence, we look at ourselves and realize very shortly, maybe today, in a few years for sure, right, this will be destroyed, So what we're looking for isn't the thing that's being destroyed. And this is the thing that, and one of the motivations we seem to see in religion is because we think we're going to die, right? We want not to die, right? That's one, and so a lot of religions based upon it seems to be, by some analysis, trying to find a way not to die, or trying to find part of it. But actually, it should start. We are going to die, right? We don't need to change that. This body is going to die. The mind is not going to last. Right, our sense of identity is very, very flimsy. That's one of the discussions we've been having recently here. So what is real in all this, right? It's not trying to make this last, right? Or trying to even not only this body last or this world last, but even my present sense of self trying to make it last, right? And so we say, we'll be reincarnated, we'll go to heaven. Well, the body will be resurrected. Some version of either the body will be resurrected or the soul will be resurrected in another body, right? And maybe that's true. I mean, that's a view of many religions, including of Hinduism, right? Right. But in a certain sense, it's trying to hold on to something which is very effervescent, always changing, right? Not very secure. So seeing that it's not secure, what's real? Not trying to make the insecure secure, make the body last forever. right? We can, what is it? We can, Swamiji also talked about, we can mummify it, make it last forever, right? Or become, or bears the way becomes resurrected, or whatever, or my mind and ego, my personality, that will last, maybe in another body, or in another realm, right? It's like, well, maybe this body will resurrected. Great, that's, I guess, I don't know. I'm not. It's bad enough now. A few years in the body may not, and the dirt may not make it better. I don't think, but who knows? Miracles, it's a belief like that, right? Or maybe we'll go to a higher realm or another realm, hopefully slightly better. Maybe another body, which is our belief like that. But it's not. That shouldn't be that shouldn't be the only motivation for religious contemplation. Right. Here, Swamiji says, it's like the body is temporary, the mind is temporary, the ego seems to be temporary at a certain, maybe not as antakarana, the thing that Hinduism believe reincarnates isn't permanent. Even that's not permanent. It's maybe it outlasts the body, but it's not. It can't be shown as being permanent. The mind, ego, and the intelligence, that's the thing that reincarnates. Right. These things are changing constantly. They maybe change more than the body. Right. So, rather than trying to hold on to this, we think, what's real independent of this? If we let go of this, what do we find? Right? That's the whole experiment of renunciation. Not that trying to get something that's bad, trying to find something that's real. Right? Not trying to let go, push something temporary. We're trying to find that which is permanent, which is infinite. Then begins renunciation. Then begins real spiritual growth. The karma, and then he goes, Swamiji's talking about the 4 yogas. Swamiji defines the world as religion. This is, of course, his method. I mean, the 4 main yogic schools in India, you could say, but other people would list the yogas differently. Some people say 4 yogas, people say 6 yogas, people say 3 yogas, right? Or you can separate them all those ways. Swamiji generally classified the religious search and technology in India as 4 primary yogas. So he's famous for the 4 yogas. So he's describing each of these 4 yogas: karma, jnana, raja, and bhakti. How renunciation finds their play in each one of them. The karma yogi's renunciation takes the shape of giving up all the fruits of his actions. That Krishna says, all that you do, all that you offer and give away, all that you eat, all the stairs perform, do that as an offering to me. Do everything, give me the fruits of everything. You have the right to work, but not their fruits, right? Give the fruits to me. This is one way to have karma-free action, karma yoga. He is not attached to the results of his labors. He does not care for any rewards here or hereafter. That's karma yoga. Actually, Krishna says in the Gita, actually, it's our expectation. It's working with a selfish expectation that creates a karmic result. So how do you work without it? How can you work without a selfish expectation? Well, how can you work without wanting? Why are you working? Right. So these are a few of the techniques given in the Gita. One is to do because it's your duty. That's the type of, it's like your duty, whether you want to or not, whether you're attached to it or not, you do it out of a sense of duty. That's dharma. Right? In other words, like whatever you do, whatever the situation, I'm doing it, but but the results I'm giving. It's another way of acting without the highest. Just everything you do is you have to do it out of love. It doesn't. Then you're not doing it for yourself at all. That's a higher thing. The Raja Yogi knows that the whole of nature is intended as a means for the soul to acquire experience, and that the result is intended. And that the result of all of the experiences of the soul is that it becomes aware of its eternal separateness from nature. Read that again. The Raja Yogi knows that the whole of the nature is intended as a means for the soul to acquire experience. Everything, whole nature, Prakriti, the only purpose is to acquire, for us to get knowledge. And that this conjunction of aqueous matter, I lost my place, sorry. The Raja Yogi knows the whole of nature is intended as a means for the soul to acquire experience, and that the result of this experience is the soul to become aware of its eternal separateness from nature. So actually the whole purpose of this is based upon Purusha Prakriti philosophy, right? But the whole purpose of our experience of nature is, our experience of life is to realize that we're separate from it, right? That's what we're going to do. And so the techniques are how to withdraw the mind. Well, philosophically, it's distinguishing Purusha and Prakriti. We're completely separate from nature, so that's called renunciation, like realization, right? And the technique is pratyahara, dharana, right? You pull the mind away from the manifestation of Prakriti, the body, the mind, the world, agitations, vrittis, all the things like that, and control the mind and put the mind on internal, still the mind and focus, so the mind can reflect upon itself. Purusha can see Purusha. The human soul has to understand and realize that it has been spirit and not matter through eternity, and that this conjunction of it with matter is and can be only for a time. Right? We think we're the body, we're not the body. We think we're the mind, we're not the mind. We think we're the ego, we're not the ego. We've never been the ego. Right? Temporarily, we think it. Right? As long as this body lasts, we think it. Maybe after the body dies, we may still think it. Right? You know, that seems to be a problem. Do it again. Right? We're not the mind. You know, we've never been the mind, and our connection with this mind is temporary. Maybe it outlasts the body, maybe not. Right? But it's very temporary. So what are we? So that realization is also a type of renunciation. The Raja Yogi learns the lessons of renunciation through his own experience of nature. The Jnana Yogi has the harshest of all renunciations to go through. Right? This is the Jnana Yogi, for he has to realize from the very first that the whole of this solid-looking nature is an illusion. That's the Jnana Yoga. That's the most difficult. Where you have to start without any experience, without any inner taste and conviction. It's like first thing they tell you, whole world, this world is unreal. God is real. The world is unreal. That's the opening. That's how it starts, right? So that's a very difficult. But it seems real. It's not. But I like it. It's too bad. It's not. Right. Right. So that's a very difficult. You have to start. So that's why I'm just saying Jnana Yoga is the most difficult. He has to understand that any kind of manifestation of power in the external nature belongs to the soul and not to nature. Everything we experience is coming from ourselves. Even the reality we see of the world. Well, this solid world, it's not that this world's unreal, but it is unreal. Whereas it's like we think the wall's outside of it. It's not outside of it. We projected it. Right? Sri Ramakrishna warned his devotees against practicing and showing siddhis. I'm going to practice a siddhi and show it and demonstrate in front of all of you right now. Right? I'm going to make 2 of Atmarams. Ready? Now there's 2 Atmarams. You also be careful. He demonstrated 2, and I felt like, so is that real? In my mind, my experience, I saw 2 Atmarams. Right? But even my mind seeing 1 Atmaram, what's the evidence? Right? You know, it's like I think it's maybe there's an external Atmaram, maybe not, but it can't be solidly shown. If a world exists, we projected it. Right? There's only consciousness playing all these forms. There's no world. There's only consciousness. That's the stance of Advaita and of Jnana Yoga. Whatever we see is not what we see. It's an expression of the seer. Right? Then there's different. Is it Maya? There's different schools that describe how that works and what that is. But ultimately, it's the same thing. What we see is not what we see. Right? The world the body that we think we are, the world that we think we're in. Right? It's not what we think. Maybe it's there, maybe it's not there, but it's not what we think for sure. He has to know from the very start that all the knowledge and all the experiences are in the soul and not in nature. So he has at once, and by the sheer force of the rational conviction, to tear himself away from all bondage to nature. Not easy. He lets nature and all that belongs to it go. He lets them vanish and tries to stand alone. Atman alone abides. Right? This is the stance of the Jnani. Right? Atman alone abides. Right? But the problem is that every experience tells us differently. Every thought tells us differently. But the Atman alone abides. This is the stance. It's also a very tough renunciation. It's not like, oh, you should give up chocolate. You know, now New Year's is coming, so everybody has to give up something. You have to. I'm gonna lose weight. I'm not gonna watch too much TV. I'm not gonna go on Facebook more than 3 hours a day. You know, show my austerity, my big renunciation. That's not renunciation. The whole world of name and form and our ideas, our projection, our body, our mind, all that is not true. Right? I stand Atman alone abide. That's renunciation, not giving up this particular thing. That's a little bit austere. That's some discipline. That's okay. That's good to give up something, free the mind from attachment to things. That's a useful austerity, but that's not real renunciation. So he's describing in just a few lines the renunciation of a karma yogi, of a raja yogi, and a jnana yogi. What about the bhakti yogi? Of all the renunciations, the most natural, so to say, is that of a bhakti yogi. Here there is no violence, nothing to give up, nothing to tear off, as it were, from ourselves, nothing from which we have to separate ourselves violently. The bhakta's renunciation is easy, smooth flowing, and as natural as the things around us. We see the manifestations of this sort of renunciation, although more or less in the form of caricatures, every day around us. So a bhakti yogi renunciation is simple. And he says it because it becomes and then he says the characters, they really are caricatures. This is like, he's going to describe a few things in the world, a few things that we see, and more or less we've seen or experienced like these. His examples, you understand his point by his examples. A man begins to love a woman. After a while, he loves another. And he lets the first woman go. She drops out of his mind smoothly, sometimes not so smoothly, but gently, without his feeling of want for her at all. A woman loves a man and then begins to love another man. And the first one drops out of her mind quite naturally. Right, so that's renunciation. You fall in love with, sometimes you simply, mind loses interest. That's one type of thing. That happens all the time. But usually in line with it because you get another interest. Right, if you fall in love with somebody else, the thing that used to be the most, that withdrawals from the mind. Right. A man loves his own city. Then he begins to love his country. And the intense love for his little city drops smoothly, naturally. Again, a man learns to love the whole world. His love for his country, his intense fanatical patriotism drops off without hurting him, without any manifestations of violence. An uncultured man loves the pleasures of the senses intensely. As he becomes cultured, he begins to love intellectual pleasures, and his sense enjoyment becomes less and less intense. No man can enjoy a meal with the same gusto or pleasure as a man or as does a dog or a wolf. But those pleasures which a man gets from intellectual experiences and achievements, the dog can never enjoy. So this is the idea of a higher taste. When one gets a higher taste, then the lower taste automatically falls away. You don't have to give it anything up. If you want to get some, as we know, if you're trying to get somebody off a particular diet, the best thing to do is feed them. Like you want to help somebody, or encourage somebody to stop eating meat. You could just scream at them, tell them how horrible meat is, and send them videos of animals being slaughtered on Facebook. That has some effect, perhaps. Right? Or the best thing to do is just feed them really wonderful, tasty, healthy, divine, love-filled food, right? And then it happens automatically, right? It's like when you get a higher taste, the lower taste fall away. An example of this I remember many years ago at the Balboa Park in San Diego. There was a Earth Day celebration, and Laguna Beach Hare Krishna Temple had a little book table, and devotee asked me if I could help them. They were on, and so I had some attachment to the restaurant at that time, so I had helped them a little bit. And the main book, it was an Earth Day, so they figured the book you present is the vegetarian book. That's the environmental connection rather than the book on philosophy or something. So they had that little book called, what's it called? The Higher Taste. It's called The Higher Taste. Perfect. And maybe that's why I brought it up. I forgot the name of the book, but it's called The Higher Taste. Very good example, right? And right next to us, we had a little stand there, and I had the book, and I'm pretty good at selling. I like books, so I'm pretty good at selling books. Next to us, there was on the street, it was on like a parade route type of road. There was a water fountain, one of those, public water fountain. And then next to us, there was people selling bottled water, right? And it was $1.50 for a bottle of water, right? And so that was a very good prop for me, right? Because I pointed out that all day long people are paying $1.50 for a glass of water that's free 30 inches away from the table, right? And that ends up being like 3,000 times more expensive course, it's free, but even if you pay for it, bottled water 3,000 times more expensive than and an argument can be made, maybe it's better, but it tastes better. Or at least you think it tastes better, So that's an example. It's like people are willing to do something. They're renouncing quite a bit, actually, But when you get a higher taste, the lower taste fall away. And another example is like, it's like if you like, it's like, oh, I'm hungry, so I have this piece of pizza or something, and somebody says, well, you shouldn't eat that. No, but I'm hungry, I'm going to eat it. But here, look, this is a better piece. It's like, oh, you're right, that looks better. Right? Or if you start eating it, then you forget. Once you get satisfied with something better, the lower things fall apart. This is the type of thing Swamiji is mentioning. Some examples of what Swamiji is mentioning. Also, Swamiji's idea that even patriotism, when you can go. Patriotism is not a bad thing. Swamiji was a great patriot. He's often called the patriot saint of India, right? He's one of the great national heroes of India. But his patriotism was not limited to India. That's the thing. His love for the world, his love for India was very strong, right? But it wasn't exclusive, right? Because he used to say that patriotism that's exclusive is actually hatred, right? It looks like love, right? And you can see love and hatred are very close to each other, right? From I love you to sometimes I love you and hate the other. That happens all the time. But then even I love you to I hate you happens really quick. From one conversation or one email, it can go from one to the other, So there's a danger like that. But love for the country should not be when it's expanded. When one has this love for humankind or mankind, love for our religion, love for the soul, love for nature, love for justice. You can get, and pretty soon you start like not even like love for mankind or humankind. That's sublime, right? But then you start like love for justice. Well, that's just an idea, right? It becomes an intellectual idea. Or a love of beauty, love of freedom, right? And those can go produce even that can even leave people behind. So even that, right? And so an intellectual idea and a pleasure and an attachment to an intellectual idea, somebody who's attached to a cruder form can't even imagine it, right? That's somebody else is saying, right? And even our attachment to the senses, which seems so real to us. When somebody who's attached to art, someone who's attached to philosophy, to logic, to these politics, intellectual pursuits like this, not everybody can understand that. Somebody says a dog can't get pleasure from that, right? And a philosopher can't get as much. I mean, philosophers have to eat, but they don't eat very well. They eat because their attachment is. Their attachment's not on the nature of the senses. The attachment has become higher, or more refined, if you can say higher. At first, pleasure is associated with the lower sense organs, but as soon as an animal reaches the higher planes of existence, the lower pleasure becomes less intense. Right? That's something, it's like. Actually, it's in Bhagavad Mahapurana. It says that this human body is actually we're not really designed to enjoy that much, because the human body was an upright spinal column, right, and a large developed brain and nervous system, right, that we believe one attains after 8,400,000 others, after living and dying in at least 8,400,000 species before we get the first human body, 8 million species before the first human body, right? So we get this apartment. We have a long waiting list and a lot of prerequisites to get this apartment, right? This body, the human body, seems to have to be uniquely qualified for first intellectual development. That's one of its qualities, right? Larger brain allows for that, right? But more than that, perhaps even spiritual realization. The sages say that the human body, the human species, is meant for spiritual realization. And spiritualization, it's not really meant for sense gratification, right? And you can see we don't get much sense gratification. We're so attached to it because we don't have higher knowledge yet. We don't have higher experience. But actually, it's not. We don't. The sense of experience we get is very fractional and infinitesimal, right? I sometimes think like somebody. Okay, we made a nice dish today, right? So we made some spaghetti. We had some spaghetti this afternoon, right? if it's tiny bit too much salt, it's not edible. No taste. If it's tiny bit not enough salt, it's not edible, right? If it's too hot, it's not enjoyable. As soon as it goes beyond, if it's a little bit too cold, it's lost all taste, right? If we find a hair in it, completely, it's the same thing, you vomit, right? It's like if we think we see a hair in it, we vomit, right? It's like the limits of things that make it pleasurable are very tiny thing, and then we put it in the tongue, and a second after it's in the tongue, it's gone, right? So even the enjoyment is so limited what we can get, what we consider enjoyable. And that only lasts for the briefest moment, right? And for that, how much money we spend on going to restaurants and things like this and getting good food and to get that little tiny pleasure, which we're not meant for it. It's like we have to eat and we have to be pleasurable. If things weren't good tasting, we wouldn't eat, right? So God, Swami Chidananda says, the Creator intelligently, but with trepidation, has put enjoyment at the end of our senses. Otherwise, we wouldn't use them. Right, we have the senses to bring information. If they're not enjoyable, you wouldn't open your eyes. If nothing was nice looking, nothing was good tasting, you wouldn't put anything in your mouth, right? So enjoyment had to be there. But some mistake happened, where pretty soon that little bit of enjoyment, which is barely anything, has become completely we become slaves to it instead of a usable tool, right? And all this is true of the tongue, but it's true of everything. What's good looking, what's good feeling, the parameters are very small, right? And most of it's in the mind. And it's whatever it is, it's temporary. And chances are we're not going to like it anyways, right? And we're going to be disappointed. It leads to more disappointing. Then we want it, right? That's suffering, right? If we get it, it's usually disappointing. That's suffering. But what if it's perfect, right? It's great. It's better than we thought. It's temporary, right? And okay, that's temporary. But let's have a bigger thing. What about I hate to be a little bit, I'm a monk, so we talk cruel things like this all the time, right? For ourselves also. But what about like a human relationship? But it's perfect. Chances are we all know it's not perfect, but let's say it's really good, right? I hope it's all very good for all of you. Wonderful human relationships, right? Right? But it's temporary. Minimally, one of you is going to die before the other. Guarantee one of you, not minimally, guarantee one of you is going to die. Sorry, I don't be cruel-minded, but you've heard it here at Kali Mandir. You're going to die, sorry. So minimally, it's temporary, right? The thing is, we don't get much enjoyment. We live our life for enjoyment, we don't get any enjoyment, or very little enjoyment, right? But until we have a higher taste, that's all we got. So we get what we can in a certain sense, right? We're pleasure-seeking animals in many ways, right? But you ever seen like a dog eating or a pig eating? They can eat, right? They enjoy eating, right? Because their life is in the senses. Our senses are too limited. They don't enjoy much, right? Or if I like this, or we're sleeping, right? It's but just like a what an animal that hibernates, like a bear or something like that. They could sleep for months, right? And our sexual activity. Also, barely anything. Actually, if we analyze, there's animals, pigeons. It's like a pigeon, which is a brain this big, right, can have sex 300 times in a day, right? Or a rabbit, the body is designed for that. Our body is not designed for that. It's bare minimum to keep enough bodies going to justify the high rent. Have a human body, right? It's not so to keep us going and keep the next generation going, right? It has to be this. So the thing is, we're not even that good at it. The problem is, you want to be a materialist, we're not good at it. We're not designed for it, right? At first, pleasures associated with the lower senses, but as soon as an animal reaches a higher plane of existence, the lower pleasures become less intense. For instance, in human society. In human society, the nearer man is to the animal, the stronger is his pleasure in the senses. And the higher and the more cultured a man is, the greater his pleasures in intellectual and other such finer pursuits. So, when man goes even higher than the plane of the intellect, higher than that of mere thought, when he reaches the plane of spirituality and the divine inspiration, he finds there a state of bliss compared to which all the pleasures of the senses or even of the intellect are as nothing. So this is the thing. Even the perhaps the human species, one of the qualities, we can get great pleasure in the intellect, right? But to the mystic who has experience of the spirit, which is infinitely higher than the intellect. We can't even imagine what that pleasure is. Leaving the pleasures of the body behind, but even the pleasures of the intellect are left behind by their experience. There's a famous verse. It's repeated. I was actually a few weeks ago. I was looking for this, trying to find an actual, because it's quoted a lot. And where is the verse? It's quoted in many texts. It's quoted, but they're all quoting another text. So I found 3-4 forms of it that are slightly worded differently. But basically, it says that the animals have four main, not just animals and humans have four main activities, right? Four main desires, four main motivations or actions. That is eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. Fear-based defending. So this is a dog, amoeba has these four things: how to eat, how to acquire nutrients, how to defend itself, how to replicate itself, procreation, and so eating, sleeping, mating, defending. Sleeping means housing, you could say, like that. You can see in an animal, this is it, right? But in humans, it's mostly that too, right? If you open up a newspaper, right, or it's a school newspaper or something like that, you can get a little bit. What get people at their best, as students at the local college. That's the most intellectually, like, then you open paper. It's going to be not just there, but it's going to be basically topics of eating. It's going to be housing issues, politics issues, safety and government politics. There's going to be romance columns and those type of things, right? It's restaurants and food. It's going to be in these four categories, right? Most things are in these four categories. And so the thing wrong. That's human. That's the animal life, right? Humans also, but the thing, humans are not just. Maybe we're just animals, but maybe we're not just animals. Right? Because it seems that the reason this verse is quoted again and again and again in the Shastra, is because the claim is that we have an ability for a fifth topic, right? We can search for, because most of the intellectual life is just refined eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, right? It's like we start philosophizing about the nature of these things and how do we know what we're, it seems that we have the ability to experience something unrelated to these four things, a fifth topic, right? A transcendental topic, right? And so you could say if you look at a magazine, maybe there's a topic on religion, maybe that has something to do. But even religion, very often it's eating, sleeping, the rules about eating, sleeping, mating, defending. It seems to be, right? It's earthbound, it's animalistic, right? But the real human, according to this view, the human life begins when the fifth topic is contemplated, is interested in, right? Doesn't mean you stop eating, right? You have to eat. Doesn't mean you stop procreating. Families continue. Doesn't mean you don't defend yourself. All these things are necessary, right? But they're not the main focus. They become a secondary. They're left behind in a certain sense, or they're dealt with appropriately. So when a man goes even higher than the plane of the intellect, higher than that of mere thought, when he reaches the plane of spirituality and the divine inspiration, he finds there a state of bliss compared to which all the pleasure of the senses, even of the intellect, are as nothing. That's something to compare. All the pleasures of the senses and all the pleasures of the intellect are, compared to that, nothing. Right? So in our old classes at UCI, we were discussing. In yoga, we use this idea of the chakras. We use that as a map to understand the development and evolution of consciousness, human consciousness, and spiritual consciousness, right? And so it's a way of analyzing the human, where we are and our level of experience. Muladhara, the base chakra, right? That means earth. The element is earth, right? And so earth means the material consciousness. Earth means the physical body, right? And so that's actually, everyone's in Muladhara Chakra, right? And so because we live in the material world, we have material consciousness, and we think of the material body. And so so as a result, eating, sleeping, mating, defending. Our religion deals with eating, mating, eating, sleeping, mating, defending. Our politics deals with eating, sleeping, mating, defending. Our morality is rules and principles of eating, sleeping, mating, defending. Put it all into it, because we're in Muladhara Chakra, and therefore the highest pleasure we can imagine is in the body. And so the highest pleasure, if you even think of sexual pleasure or intellectual pleasure, all these things at their extreme are the extreme at the lowest chakra in Muladhara, right? The way we think of the chakras, this is not what Swamiji is talking about, I want to use this as an example. We think of this. We think of infinite consciousness taking on as if some limitation, right? Because consciousness has no name or form, it has no qualities, but it seems to take on the quality of its container, like putting air into a balloon. You put air into a balloon, it becomes balloon-shaped, right? The air inside of a balloon. But actually, air has no shape on its own. So you take that, and you begin to condense it from infinite consciousness to something that's infinite but something, right? That we call that space, right? Or akasha, right? If we condense that, shove it more, we call that, it's something that's now, it still has no shape, right? No direct, it's not directly something, but now you can be felt. It can be manipulated more, we call that air, right? These are not the periodic tables of the elements, these are experiential table of the elements. It's, how many elements are in the periodic table?
103.
103? So we have, this is a list of 5, so it's a little simpler. It's not as, I did better on this test than in my periodic table. I did very badly on that one. 36, yeah, you get 5, 36, or 36. Oh, you have a tantric list. 24, according to Sankhya, There's either 5, 24, 36, or 100 and, what did you say? What was the other? 100 or whatever the periodic table. So anyway, so you have air. You take air and you shove it, you tighten it. What happens if you take air and condense it? It gets hot. We call that fire, right? If you take fire, fire has a quality that it condenses. It causes condensation. We call that water. These are conceptually or imaginatively considered. Water, if you take water and you slow it down and makes it dense and harder and thicker, it becomes solidified. We call that earth, right? Water becomes ice, right? Or becomes earth. So that idea of infinite consciousness becoming as if the most possible limitation, that's called earth or Muladhara. Slightly less limitation, we call that the second chakra. I forget from what the second chakra is. Swadhisthana. That is water. Right above that, Manipura is fire. Above that, Anahata is air. Vishuddha is space. Right, and then we get mind and higher and higher and higher, things like this, right? Right. So that's one way of thinking. So all of our experience, even the most wonderful, right, physical experience, the most imaginable, mind-blowing, if you want to use this type of language, right, physical experience, right, the goal at which everyone is hankering, the best we can do is in Muladhara, right? So that makes, and think that's enough to keep the whole world running. Right, and next generation procreating, right? It's the way we work, the highest possible pleasure or the highest part intellectual pleasure, right? But the next level up is considered 1,000 times more free, right? An explosion of consciousness from earth to fire or earth to water is 1,000 times more free, less dense. So the experience will be 1,000 times greater. So the scriptures say, and the yogis say, right? And then so that's a second chakra, third chakra. So the highest. Imagine that those who we believe, or they claim, right? If you believe or not, the claim is by a certain mystic that they have an infinite. They've experienced an infinite, the same unitive experience, the unitive experience is Padasambhita, the Padasambhita experience, not just the supreme unitive experience. Not in the body, not in the mind, not in the emotions, not in the senses, right? Not into intellect, right? But beyond all, so you can't imagine it, right? And so the thing is, with there that famous, we've mentioned, Swamiji actually starts the book for a different point about a frog from the ocean falls into the well, right? And the well frog says, well, where do you come from? I come from the ocean. What's it like? Well, it's really big. Is it bigger? Is it big as my well? That's silly. It's thousands of times bigger than your well. That's not. Is it? And the frog jumps. It is this big. Says, it's this big. It's inconceivably bigger than what you've jumped. I don't believe you've never. There's no such thing as an ocean. You're a liar, and I'll get out of here. Right? If you don't, I'll kill you. That's usually what happens to mystics, right? Now, this is this view of other religions, but I can think because what happens because they're claiming something that's so beyond our experience, right? But I just mean why it's beyond our experience. We the highest pleasure we can almost never get, but even if we get or even conceive, is infinitesimally small compared to what they're claiming to have experienced, right? This is Swamiji's point. So when the greatest, at first, pleasure is associated with the lower sense organs, but as soon as the animal reaches a higher plane of existence, the lower pleasures becomes less intense. In human society, the nearer man is to the animal, the stronger is his pleasure in the senses, and the higher and more cultured a man is, the greater is his pleasure in intellectual and other such finer pursuits. When a man goes even higher than the plane of the intellect, higher than that of the mere thoughts, when he reaches the plane of spirituality and a divine inspiration, he finds there a state of bliss compared with which all the pleasure of the senses or even of the intellect are as if nothing. When the moon, now this is a beautiful, Thakur uses this example too, when the moon shines brightly, all the stars seem dim. But when the sun shines, the moon itself becomes dim. Sri Ramakrishna describes this also. He tells the story of two fireflies thinking, oh, look how bright I am. Right? It's like that. But then the night, the stars come up. And when you realize, then the stars go, oh, you're not that bright. Look at me. Right? And then the fireflies become insignificant. Right? But then the moon, as soon as the moon comes up, the stars pale and insignificant like that. The moon thinks, oh, look, I am the one that's shining. Right? But when the sun comes up, the moon is also forgotten. Right? So it's like, it's that same type of thing, When the moon shines brightly, all the stars become dim, and when the sun shines, the moon itself becomes dim. The renunciation necessary for the attainment of bhakti is not obtained by killing anything. It comes naturally, just as in the presence of an increasingly stronger light, less intense lights become dimmer and dimmer until they vanish away completely. With the higher experience, the lower experience just recede and disappear without any violence, without any struggle. Right. Sometimes, of course, we find in a sadhak, we find a snare, we get caught on something. We sometimes may have to whack it with a stick and throw it overboard. Sometimes there's still some internal struggle that has to be in discipline. We find ourselves caught on something. But really, the real renunciation, when you have the higher taste, when you get the higher experience, the other things lose their interest naturally. So this love of the pleasures of the senses and of the intellect is all made dim and thrown aside and cast into the shade by the love of God Himself. That love of God grows and assumes a form called para bhakti, or supreme devotion. Forms vanish, rituals fly away. Books are superseded. Images, temples, churches, religions and sects, countries and nationalities, all these little limitations and bondages fall away naturally from him who knows this love of God. It's a very big thing to go beyond all these things. Nothing remains to bind him or fetter his freedom. Then a wonderful example. A ship all of a sudden comes near a magnetic rock, and its iron bolts and bars are all attracted and drawn out, and the planks are loosened and float freely on the water. This is, Sri Ramakrishna uses this example a lot. Swamiji is just quoting Thakur, right? This is kind of the legend of like the Bermuda Triangle, or that type of thing of Thakur's time, that there's this giant magnetic stone somewhere, and a boat comes near, and what happens in presence of the magnet, all its bolts are pulled apart. All the nails are pulled from the planks. What happens? Within a second, all what used to be a boat, right, full of people with an intention and a motivation and a charge, right, and a flag, right. Pretty soon, just because it gets so close to that giant magnetic rock, It just, a few seconds later, it just planks, drifting in different directions. The thing gets pulled apart. So this is Thakur's example, Swamiji's example, Pada Bhakti. At that level, everything gets, you get close enough. You don't have to sit there and try, like right now where we've been, Prakash and Madhuri have been pulling apart our roof on our patio. Not easy, right? It's like you have to use bolts and crowbars and screw guns, trying to undo it. It's not, we can try to do that, but once you get close enough, everything just pulled apart. The things that hold it together come apart. Divine grace thus loosens the binding bolts and bars of the soul, and it becomes free. So in this renunciation, auxiliary to devotion, there is no harshness, no dryness, no struggle, no repression or suppression. These are all the accusations people do in religion, we ourselves do, and we struggle with in religion. What is it? It's dry, it's stinging, it's harsh, it's repressive and suppressive. This is exactly the thing, but actually this is none of those things. Right? With a higher experience, these other things fall away and there's no struggle. The Bhakta has not to suppress any single one of his emotions. He only strives to intensify them and direct them to God. This is the preparatory renunciation. But this is the preparatory renunciation to Pada Bhakti. Right, so the renunciation to get to Pada Bhakti also happens naturally. As we get closer to God, the other things fall away. What happens when the renunciation at Pada Bhakti? Then it becomes a little bit mind-blowing, which we shall next week, God willing. I think next week may be Swami Vivekananda's birthday, so we can read, be good to meditate on this text next Saturday, I believe. Next Saturday the 7th?
Saturday 6.
Oh, Sunday. Oh, Saturday. Anyway, okay. It's good to know. My brain I'm not good at these type of dates and stuff. But we're actually done a little early compared to my normal. Actually, we're done on 5 minutes late, but for me, this is really early. It's really, are there any questions or comments or angry shoutings in capital letters? Yeah, that's true. It's another way. And actually those are related to the 5 tattvas, because each of the chakras has the aksharas. Actually the letters, actually it's very mysterious. I mean, if you push it scientifically, it may fall apart, but the way we understand it metaphysically, not physically, but the letters of the aksharas, the letters, the matrikas, the syllables, should I say, the syllables in the chakras. Each chakra is seen to have petals. Those petals are said to, there's 4 petals in the first chakra, and then 10 petals and 12 petals, 6 petals, 10 petals, 12 petals, 16 petals, 2 petals, 1,000 petals, like that. Those petals, where the idea of petals come from, each one has a syllable. And those syllables combine, not in an obvious way, that's why it's hard to push it, but in a metaphysical way, to combine to a bij mantra. So the letters that make the thing make the, like lam, vam, yam, ram, hum, like this. That is the om, just like that the infinite consciousness is being pushed down into matter or being tightened, right? Same like one sound is being condensed and refracted and pulled apart into the different letters, into the different sounds. The one sound gets broken into 52 sounds, or 54 sounds. It's true. There's a mantra in the we use in puja. Bhuta Shinga Shushumna Bhuta Shingasha Bhutra. I can do it in puja. What is it? What's Swamiji? Bhutra Shinga Shush. I know the rest of it, but the first part. But anyways, this is very embarrassing. I'm the pujari here. I'm supposed to know these things. I've taught it to many people. But Bhuta Shinga Shushumna. So it means actually that Jiva Shiva Paramapada Yojami, the individual soul trapped in the bhutas. Here bhuta means the elements, right? So it means fire, earth, space, air, fire, water, earth, right? So at the base of it, so what happens, we're now, the infinite Shiva, Pada Shiva, becomes Jiva Shiva, right? The supreme Shiva now is thinking or acting, experience of as little tiny infinitesimal Shiva, as if there's any such thing as a little tiny infinitesimal Shiva. Shiva is always Pada Shiva, but Pada Shiva now thinks of itself as Jiva Shiva. Why? Because it seems to be entrapped by the Bhuta, by the elements, right? Right. And so, and there's a Bhuta, Patena Jiva. What's the Sakta mantra again? Bhuta Jiva Shiva Parama Shiva Parayo Jyami Swaha. I unite. The goal of it is I unite the Jiva Shiva to Pada Shiva through Shushumna Patena, through the path of the Shushumna. Right. This is a secret of a technique called Bhuta Shuddhi in Tantra. Right. It's not just Bhuta Shuddhi; it's spiritual life. It's everything in spiritual life is Bhuta Shuddhi. This is the tantric way of understanding it, right? The individual is trying to find the universal, the infinite, right? And it does it through the path of Sushumna, which is the path through the elements, right? Freeing itself, tattva after tattva, or bhuta after bhuta, and each time it expands from one to another. If you take a balloon and pop it, what happens? Just the air inside a balloon is simply filling the space, rushing to fill the space of the container, the larger container. That seems to be an explosive experience, right? That seemingly explosive movement of energy, really nothing's happened. It's just filling that which was like it's also described in the scriptures as a coil. You push a coil down, you let it coil it regains its freedom, So the space of regain, we call that Shakti. I had a powerful experience, I had an awakening experience, I felt something, or some mind-blowing thing, or I felt something in my spine, or my prana, we give it all kinds of, describe its manifestation. Is just the experience of the individual gaining a tiny bit of freedom, right? So imagine that freedom at the Padma Shiva, What's the final verse of that? You'll get it. What's the last one again? Before that. How did my puja book? That's a good point. Very bad. In puja, I do it naturally. We never speak these mantras out of context. We do. I've done this every day for 25 years, but thank you. I got it. But it's a perfect description. Paramashiva Shushumna Patena Mula Shingatam Lassa Lassa. So the first verse is Bhuta Shinga Tachiraha Shushumna Patena Jiva Shiva Pada Shiva Pada Yojami Swaha. Enmeshed in the elements from the base chakra on up, I rise in the individual Jiva and unite it with the supreme, the Jiva Shiva to Padma Shiva. Right, and then the final, there's a couple of the mantras there, but the final one, then becomes a prayer. First is describing what has to be done. That's spiritual life. Now, but we're devotees. We're calling up to God. What are we calling up to God? The individual is calling to the infinite, right? To the higher, the infinite. O Padma Shiva, Shushumna Patena, through the path to Shushumna, Mula Shingatam Mulasa, from the path, from the base, from the Mula, all the way up, from earth consciousness or body consciousness to infinite consciousness, through all the stages represented by the chakras, and when you visualize it this way. So that's it. Oh Shiva, help me come from the base on up. Bring me up through each. This is what we're doing. So that is actually spiritual life. That is spiritual practice, right? When we start, the very first mantra is always for the Ganesha. We always start puja with Ganesha. We start a wedding with Ganesha. We start education with Ganesha. We start a voyage with Ganesha. We start a business with Ganesha, right? Why? Right? It's Gana Isha. Ganesha has many, many meanings, but Gana, we know Gana is a category of semi-divine beings. These are the attendants of Lord Shiva. These are the angelic hosts. These, we could like that. But Gana has an esoteric meaning in Tantra. Gana means the senses. right? So Ganesha is the Lord of the senses. Ganapati, the master of the senses. Same thing, right? Right. So where is Ganesha? In Muladhara Chakra. He guards in the most famous of the stories of Ganesha. Ganesha, the Divine Mother Gauri is taking a bath, and she makes out of, what does she do? She uses turmeric, a yellow powder. The color of the Muladhara Chakra of the earth element is yellow, and so that's turmeric is used for this. And it's also it's an actual thing to wet the body with turmeric. It's beautifying and antiseptic and anti-inflammatory and all the things. And she took the sweat and dirt from her body, right? And who's she? Parvati. Parvati means a daughter of the mountains, right? So she's earth element. This is the body, right? The one who lives in the body. Taking the turmeric made that represents the earth from the dirt and sweat of her body, which represents the earth, and making a little character, now brought him to life and protect me, right? So that's his job is. So he is the earth element. Some yogis say actually Ganesha is the Devi. He's the supreme Devi in Muladhara, right? In earth consciousness, that's all we got. God is going. That's how you see he's the most popular. Even in this temple, there's, I don't know if you see at the count, we probably have 17 times more Ganeshas than any other deity. Everybody has more Ganeshas than everybody, right? Right. Ganesha is the most popular. He's the most approachable, right? He's what we have, right? But he's showing to start. We want to worship the Devi in the Muladhara Chakra. We want to worship Kundalini. We want to come up, or we want to find the infinite, supreme, the beyond. We have to start where we are, and we are energetically mapped as the base of the body, but practically in material consciousness. We have to go beyond material consciousness, and that requires Gana Isha, Ganapati, beginning to control the senses. To do anything for a wedding or a business or a school or a voyage or a puja, you have to overcome. You have to overcome. You have to go beyond the body a little bit. You have to take even to get up is like, you have to even to get it's getting harder as the Muladhara consciousness becomes stronger as I get older instead of less. Body consciousness is reality, and the Shakti is less than the matter. The ratio between Shakti and matter becomes different, right? Even you can see it's really even to get up and go to the other room is a great act of overcoming Muladhara consciousness or earth consciousness or enmeshed in the elements, So Ganesh is so he's a lord of the Muladhara. He's giving the hints. If you want his worship. Also another point we sometimes think was this is a little tangent but related to Ganesh Puja. When we worship Ganesha at the beginning of education or of a wedding or of a business, right? Ganesha doesn't do business for us. He doesn't study for us. Right, and he doesn't work on the relationship for us, right? You have to work on the relationship, right? You have to get up early and stay up late and study and go to class and buy the books and pay attention and know all that hard work, right? And you have to, how much sacrifice has to be done in order to start and run a business? It takes 100% sacrifice even to run a bad business, but to speak of a successful business, So Ganesh Puja is not Ganesh do it. Ganesh is us doing it. It's us. So he's giving the thing. Ganesh, we worship him. We believe that he's giving grace to do it, but his grace is us doing it. We have to study. So the sadhana to overcome material consciousness, either by rejecting, by strong act of renunciation, which seems to be very difficult, right, or by the higher call, right, higher experience. We can go beyond just our material consciousness and physical consciousness, physical awareness, physical motivation, sensual experiences, to intellectual, to higher and higher and higher, to the highest descriptions given by the rishis, saints, mystics, great lovers of God. That goes to the letters, I think, but it was good. Any other comments? How are we doing on that? Almost. Still going? Yeah.
I don't know, Swamiji, this might require too long an answer, so if it does, feel free not to answer. But what's a good way of understanding the difference between Jnana Yoga and Raja
It's a big.
Yeah,
Swamiji has two books. One's this big. One's this big, and one's this big. That's the difference, you know.
I have a hard time understanding the
Yeah. Well, Jnana Yoga and Raja Yoga. Well, the way we're using usually Raja Yoga is a method of meditation that comes from, like, an example of that system is the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, is a good snapshot of the techniques of that system, of a step-by-step way of controlling the mind and internalizing the mind, right, and withdrawing the mind from and stilling the mind in a certain sense, you know, right. Jnana Yoga is that we get to work is of understanding. It could lead the belief we believe, Swamiji believes, that through Raja Yoga you can get jnana, you can get knowledge, right, but Gyan is not necessarily the point of Raja Yoga, right? It's a different. Their motivation. Sometimes the points are different.
Thank you.
No, anyway, we can actually. We'll talk about Jnana Yoga. And Swamiji, his Jnana Yoga is not easy to read. But like Swamiji is not easy to read generally, but his Jnana Yoga is extremely sophisticated, right? And you realize. But one thing Swamiji does say in this book itself, and he has said, and Krishna says also, that between these four yogas, Bhakti Yoga is the most natural, right? And therefore it's the easiest, but it's not easiest in the sense that it's simple or something like that. It's easier because it's natural. Right, but the same points renunciation has to be accomplished, right? Knowledge has to be gained, experience has to be gained, mind has to be controlled. But in Raja Yoga, one controls their own mind. In Bhakti Yoga, by devotion to God, the mind's automatically controlled. There's a difference in that, right? So, anyways, we'll go into the. Actually, even Swamiji in this text itself will fold those ideas in.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, tell me.
Kriya Yoga then? Is it part of
Well,
Raja Yoga?
that's a good thing. Kriya only means action, and it means different things according to context, right? Patanjali mentions Kriya Yoga is a combination of I believe it's pratyahara, dharana, and tapasya. I believe those three. I think he calls Kriya. That's his use of Kriya Yoga. Usually now in modern yoga, we use Kriya Yoga as a technique introduced to the West by Yogananda and that Paramahansa Yogananda lineages. That's because they're doing an internal action, right? Using the mind to do something, to follow the breath, and to do something specifically. So they've labeled that Kriya because it's a mental action, right? It's a new term. The term Kriya before that, 100 years ago, only meant, in Kriya Yoga, it was this definition by Patanjali, which has nothing to do with this. It's a different, you can use the word differently, right? Right, but like Ramanuja uses Kriya to mean ritual actions, right? So doing japa and puja, that's called Kriya Yoga, according to Ramanuja, right? You have to know how it's used. So usually when you hear Kriya Yoga, we know it means a particular technique or a series of techniques or related techniques. That's a form of pranayama and pratyahara that introduced like that. But Patanjali uses the term differently. Not unrelated. You could say they're connected.
Well, it can also be involuntary movements.
That's another thing. Kriya means movement. So that's the thing. So sometimes you'll see people shaking and moving like that. Sometimes in certain communities, we call that Kriya. Right? To show, like somebody will go into to show a movement of the body like that. We call that. That's also called a Kriya. To show a yoga, we call that. Oh, he's showing yoga kriyas, right? And so that means something different than following the mind around through the chakras in a particular way. Use a breath. That's another person would mean Kriya Yoga, or a combination of three parts of Patanjali. They're called Kriya Yoga. That's true. It's yet another. And also, like in Hatha Yoga, Kriya, they are purification techniques. Like for instance, pouring water. What are they called? Jal neti. Jal neti is one of the kriyas, right? Sut neti, kunjal kriya, which is a method of drinking water and then vomiting back out. Very fun. I suggest it to everybody on a weekly basis. This is one that's very popular at our ashram, so we had to learn these horrible things. I think we could say, oh yeah, come to our ashram and Kriya Yoga. They'll be very disappointed. Creative vomiting. Right, those are so the community Kriya means action. Right, so any action is Kriya. So every community, every group will be describing a different action as Kriya Yoga. So it's a good question, but it's an interesting. Yeah, it's a term that nowadays means so many things, and people think that we use it, and we think we're saying the same thing. We're not saying the same thing at all, right? You have to define your terms or know by context. Sometimes you know by context what are the 17 uses Kriya takes place. Jai Thakur, Jai Ma, thank you for your kind attention. Hari Om Tat Sat. Okay.